Hey guys, welcome to Meldrum Performance Coaching's Complete Personal Trainer podcast. So, we've gone through the MPC fat loss hierarchy where we've talked about nutrition, so the calories in part of thermodynamics, and calories out. So, we've talked about NEAT being the second most important thing in the hierarchy as it has the highest contribution to total daily energy expenditure, aerobic training, and resistance training. So now we're going to be talking about application. Now the final part of the hierarchy, things like Pilates, yoga, other forms of movement where it's not really structured as much, the calorie burn isn't that high. So it's not like they're wrong to do, but if you have the shortest amount of time, they're not the best way to go about it. So if you've only got, like, say, 3 hours a week to do structured exercise and you pick Pilates as your form of exercise and the goal is fat loss, it's not the best way to do it. Of course, nutrition is more important, but you can always optimize things to some degree. So for this podcast, what I want to talk about is where the rubber hits the road, looking at the practical application of everything that we've said so far. So when you're coaching a client, the most important thing is to always have practical application and to be able to get people to do what you need them to do to get the result they want. So there's 5 steps that we've got. 5 steps? Yeah, 5 steps that we've got to help people achieve their goals. First one is determine the client's goal and the level of the client's both their nutritional and their training literacy and matching our interventions to that. So we know what we need to do. We need to create a calorie deficit. We need to do some non-exercise activity. We need to do some aerobic exercise. We need to do some resistance training, and other stuff is the icing on the cake. If the client's goal is fat loss, we can look at that and then we can go, all right, cool. What's the most important thing we need to look at? Realistically, it's nutrition. We need to do this within the scope of our boundaries as personal trainers, and we need to get them doing some kind of, resistance, some kind of exercise outside the gym. We need to make sure they're active, etc., etc., etc. Everything that I've kind of already touched on. We need to make sure the strategies we give people to achieve this are relative to their level of skill and ability. So an example of this, if you've got someone who is a level 1 client, so they've come into I've talked about this in previous podcasts too, so just have a look through it on whatever platform you're on. If they come into the gym and they've never followed a diet before and they've never trained before, giving them a program of high intensity interval training and then giving them a specific macro count to work with, using that as an example. And then carb cycling, again, just examples, for them to start with is going to be very, very inefficient because they're not going to be able to stick to it, they're not going to understand it, and they're not going to be able to perform it. You'd be better off with a client like that who's never done anything before, to get them to a food diary, to have a couple more serves of veggies a day, maybe reduce the portions on the crap food that they're eating constantly but they're not so much aware of, allowing them to choose, of course, and then giving them a very basic training program, which is made up of, like, say, 20 minutes of cardiovascular training and like a 30-minute resistance training workout. That's going to give them a fantastic outcome. So you need to match the intervention to the client's skill level. Now, step 2 is to involve the client in the decision-making process. And I've talked about client-centered coaching ad nauseum. The reason why we're going to do this and we're going to include them in the decision-making process is it helps them come up with a strategy or an intervention that matches their level of competence and compliance. So that's really useful, but it builds autonomy in the long term. Our ultimate marker of achievement as a personal trainer is for a client to get results of ours, because we've taught them everything that they need to know to get the results that they want to achieve. So we've effectively done our goal. The next thing is to write the program based on the training time available and logistical concerns. So you also need to take the client's personal preference into account and any outstanding needs. So let's unpack each of those. I've written training programs that take 2 hours to finish for a client and only has 1 hour to do it. Will they get done? The answer is no. I've made that mistake quite a few times. Logistical concerns. Giving clients a giant set in the middle of a busy gym when they train at 6 p.m. at night isn't a good idea, particularly if it uses multiple pieces of equipment. Again, a mistake I've made. Personal preference into account. This client loves doing arm work, and I'm like, oh, well, it's not calorie. It doesn't, burn as many calories as the other things. It's not the best use of your time. But I don't do the program. Again, another mistake that I made. And any outstanding needs. So needs are when you screen your client and I say they're a client with low back pain, for example, and you give them high volume deadlifts. That's not really taking into account their needs, because the load will exceed their volume tolerance, etc. We won't get into injury stuff. It's a very basic example, but we need to write the program with all these things at top of mind so we make sure it's something the client will adhere to. From there, we want to create a measurement and accountability process. Involve the client and pick the measures that are most important to them. These are things like scale weight, tape measures, body fat if you're using calipers or a machine to measure it. Just be aware of the potential inaccuracies there. Step counts, calorie counts, whatever it is. You want to have a couple of things that will actually measure the intervention. So a couple of tools to measure the intervention, and then a couple of tools to measure the results of the intervention. So when you come up with your intervention, you can simply ask your client, how would you like to measure that? And how would you like me to provide accountability? And that's a really simple way to get away for it. And the client will come up with the answer. It's going to give them more impetus to follow that. So what we can do here is, okay, cool, with measurement, we're going to do weight every day. You're going to hop on the scale every day. We'll record it on the training app. How does that sound? Fantastic. Cool. You've got a compliant client. And then finally, step 5 is execute and reassess. So the reassessment part is really, really important. If things are going well, guess what you do? You do nothing. You try and get out as many gains as possible out of the protocol that you gains or losses. We'll call fat losses gains, which is quite confusing, but I'm sure everyone who's listening understands exactly what I mean. But you want to eke out as many gains as you can, or as many good results as you can, with as little disruption to the client's life as possible. If they aren't getting results, you want to reassess. You want to figure out what's going on. Is it the program? Is it the compliance? Now, 99% of the time, it will be compliance with the goal, which will probably come back to a lack of understanding of the goal or the client not being involved heavily enough in the goal setting process. Occasionally, it will come back to a ridiculous goal, and poor decision making, but generally that's not so much the case, because the decision making process, like reduce calories, increase output, isn't that hard. So a lot of the time it's just going to be a compliance and adherence issue that you need to figure out, which is generally identified. The problem of it generally is, the cause of it generally is the client not liking the strategy that they have to stick to and not being able to do it properly. So guys, that is the MPC fat loss hierarchy. If you can stick to those 5 things, and you can make sure you can emphasize the things in the right order, you will get awesome fat loss results with your general population clients. In the podcast, we're going to flip back another bit to a bit normal topics. Unless you like it, just send me a message on Instagram. Let me know what you think. That's where most people are reaching out to me on. You're doing Facebook as well. And we'll be coming back into hypertrophy hierarchy down the track. Thanks heaps, guys. Thanks heaps for listening. Really appreciate it. Speak to you soon.